Greetings, I am Reverend Yue McCormick, Head Minister of Enduzan, Perfect Dragon Mountain, Shinganji, True Vow Temple, of the Nichiren Shu Sangha of the San Francisco Bay Area. In this four-part presentation, it is my goal to cover those things about the teachings of the Lotus Sutra that Nichiren Shu expects its clergy to know. I feel that this might also be of interest to dedicated lay practitioners, as well as those who are curious about Buddhism and would like to know more about its founder and the basic teachings and practices that he taught. I will note that material appearing in dark red rather than black is material that is either not covered or not covered in detail in the book History and Teachings of Nichiren Buddhism, published by the Nichiren Shu Text Editorial Committee. This is material that I personally feel is important for Nichiren Buddhist practitioners to be familiar with, especially clergy and lay teachers. Quotes in Lotus Sutra are taken from the Senchu Murano translation. I have also drawn from the book Introduction to the Lotus Sutra by Yoshiro Tamura. Now let's begin the second of the four parts, opening the three to reveal the one. Chapter 2 begins with what is known as the three refusals and three requests. First, the Buddha emerges from Samadhi and tells Shariputra about the profundity of the wisdom of the Buddhas. He says, "No more, Shariputra, will I say, because the Dharma attained by the Buddhas is the highest truth, rare to hear and difficult to understand. Only the Buddhas attain the highest truth, that is, the reality of all things." He then proceeds to explain or expound the 10 suchnesses, and ends with, Shariputra then asks him to explain. The Buddha says, "No, no, I will not. If I do, all the gods and men in the world will be frightened and perplexed." The Shariputra asks again for him to explain. The Buddha says, "No, if I do, all the gods, men, and asuras in the world will be frightened and perplexed, and the arrogant bhikshus will fall into a great pit." But Shariputra asks a third time. So here you have the Buddha refusing 3 times to further explain the Dharma, but Shariputra asks 3 times, thereby showing his sincere wish to hear the Buddhas explain the wonderful Dharma. This whole exchange is known as the concise opening of the 3 to reveal the one, because it hints at the one vehicle that is beyond the understanding of any practitioner of the 3 vehicles, without fully revealing or elaborating upon it. The Lotus Sutra opens with the beginning of the former assembly on Mount Sacred Eagle and Chapter 1, Introductory. The initial events in this chapter are known as the 2 sets of 6 good omens. They begin right after Ananda describes who is present in the assembly, namely the bodhisattvas, male and female voice hearers, lay followers, and various supernatural creatures, representing all possible beings who can benefit from the wonderful Dharma. The first set of omens are that the Buddha expounds the Infinite Meaning Sutra, a sutra that would later be composed as the opening sutra of the threefold Lotus Sutra. The Buddha then enters the samadhi, or state of unitive concentration, on infinite meanings. Note that Senchu Murano translates this as the samadhi of innumerable teachings. As a result, 4 kinds of flowers rain down, the world quakes in 6 ways, and the great multitude rejoice, put their hands together, and look up to the Buddha with one mind. Finally, the Buddha emits a ray of light from the white curls beneath his eyebrows and illuminates 18,000 worlds to the east. The second set of omens deals with what was revealed by that light illuminating the worlds to the east. The light illuminates all 6 destinies of those worlds, in other words, the hells, hungry ghosts, animals, fighting demons, humans, and gods. The Buddhas of those worlds are seen. The Buddhas are seen to be expounding the right teachings. The voice hearers and privately awakened ones of those worlds are seen, as are the bodhisattvas of those worlds. And finally, the stupas of the Buddhas after they enter final nirvana are seen. In other words, all the beings of the 10 realms are seen in that light. Maitreya Buddha asks what all this means. Manjushri explains to him that based on his past experience observing the actions of many Buddhas named Sun Moonlight, he believes that Shakyamuni Buddha is about to teach the sutra, the lotus flower of the wonderful Dharma. Notice that the Lotus Sutra as a scriptural text has already begun, but in the scripture, the Lotus Sutra, which the scripture is named after, has not yet been taught. The Buddha's response begins the section called the expanded opening of the 3 vehicles to reveal the one vehicle, which continues to the end of chapter 9. 5,000 arrogant monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen leave, presuming that they do not need to hear any further teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha says, "Now this congregation has been cleared of twigs and leaves, only sincere people being left. Shariputra, those arrogant people may go. Now listen to me attentively. I will expound the Dharma to you." The Buddha then speaks of the one great purpose for which Buddhas appear in the worlds. The Buddhas, the world-honored ones, appear in the worlds in order to cause all living beings to open the gate to the insight of the Buddha and to cause them to purify themselves. They appear in the worlds in order to show the insight of the Buddha to all living beings. They appear in the worlds in order to cause all living beings to obtain the insight of the Buddha. They appear in the worlds in order to cause all living beings to enter the way to the insight of the Buddha. Shariputra, this is the one great purpose for which the Buddhas appear in the worlds. Because this is the one great purpose, there is really only one vehicle, not three. The three are all just limited aspects of the one vehicle that will enable Buddhist practitioners to attain Buddhahood. In order to help beings, the Buddha teaches the one vehicle using three methods or cycles of expounding the Dharma. The first cycle involves directly expounding the one vehicle, as the Buddha does in Chapter 2, for the sake of those of superior capacity who can understand such direct exposition, such as Shariputra. The second cycle involves expounding parables about the one vehicle, as the Buddha and others do in Chapters 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 14, for those of average capacity to understand, such as Subhuti, Mahakatyayana, Mahakashyapa, and Mahamadgalyayana. The third cycle involves expounding causes and conditions, in other words, stories about past life connections to the one vehicle, such as the story the Buddha tells in Chapter 7 for the sake of those of dull capacity, such as Purna, Aniruddha, Ananda, and Rahula, who need to know that they already have a personal connection from previous lifetimes before they can believe that they too have been practicing the one vehicle all along. Let us now look at the direct expounding of the one vehicle in Chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra, beginning with how the three vehicles were taught as a skillful means to prepare his followers for the one vehicle. Prior to teaching the Mahayana, the Buddha taught the two vehicles, the voice hearers and privately awakened ones, using the Four Noble Truths and the 12-fold chain of dependent origination, respectively, for those who only wished to escape the cycle of birth and death, but either did not care to aspire to Buddhahood for the sake of all beings, or did not believe they were capable of such a thing. This teaching prepares people by freeing them from clinging to the 6 realms of rebirth. The Buddha then introduced the Bodhisattva vehicle of provisional Mahayana. The Bodhisattva vehicle taught in other Mahayana sutras seems to only be for those who have the aspiration, compassion, and courage to take up the long and difficult way to Buddhahood. Therefore, those who take up the way of the two vehicles are excluded, especially those who have become arhats, because they can no longer be reborn and continue building up the merit and wisdom needed to attain Buddhahood. As for the bodhisattvas, it is believed that it will take them at least 3 innumerable eons before they can amass the merit and wisdom needed to attain Buddhahood. This teaching prepares people by challenging them to leave the two vehicles and take up the bodhisattva vehicle. The one vehicle, however, is the true Mahayana teaching, because no one is excluded, not even the arhats or the privately awakened ones. In fact, they will eventually realize that they were practicing the one vehicle all along. Furthermore, not only is the one vehicle not exclusive, but it is swift as well and does not require innumerable eons of practice for the attainment of Buddhahood. So even the third bodhisattva vehicle is just a provisional approach to the one vehicle. It is not itself the one vehicle. In Chapter 2, the Buddha says to his chief disciple, "Shariputra, there is not a second vehicle in the worlds of the 10 quarters. How can there be a third?" He also explains that the Buddhas divide the one vehicle into 3 as an expedient. What the Buddha is saying is that all his teachings and practices were part of the one vehicle all along. The 3 vehicles had always been nothing more than rhetorical devices to enable the Buddha's followers to practice the one vehicle. There has never been a time in which the Buddha intended for his followers to achieve a lesser awakening than himself. The Buddha says, "Know this, Shariputra, I once vowed that I would cause all living beings to become exactly as I am." What this means is that all those who sincerely follow the Buddha are actually bodhisattvas, even if they may not realize it at first. Again, the Buddha says, I say to you, I will expound the teaching of the one vehicle only to bodhisattvas. There is no Shravaka among my disciples. In his introduction to the Threefold Lotus Sutra, Brooke Zipperin says of this, further, and here, quote, further, and here comes that core teaching of the Lotus Sutra. He informs his disciples that all of them, anyone who is hearing his instruction, is in fact a bodhisattva, a Buddha in training. This includes, emphatically and centrally, the Shravakas and Arhats. They are precisely those who have denied they were bodhisattvas. They believed they were working towards nirvana. Now the Buddha tells them, your work toward nirvana, your very denial of interest in the goal of Buddhahood, your sense of your own activity as a Shravaka rather than a Buddha, all of these are themselves part of your bodhisattva training. This is the meaning of skillful means. You are doing much more than you realized, and you need not change your ways. Just by continuing them, developing them, they will reverse into their own self-overcoming. End quote. In terms of parables, there are many in the Lotus Sutra, but 7 have been singled out as especially significant. These are the parable of the 3 carts in the burning house, in chapter 3, a parable, as told by Shakyamuni Buddha, the parable of the wealthy man and his poor son, as told in chapter 4, Understanding by Faith, by Subhuti, Mahakatyayana, Mahakashyapa, and Maudgalyayana, the parable of the 3 kinds of medicinal herbs and 2 trees, as told in chapter 5, the simile of herbs, by Shakyamuni Buddha, the parable of the magic city and the treasure land, as told in chapter 7, the parable of a magic city, by Shakyamuni Buddha, the parable of the jewel in the robe, as told in chapter 8, the assurance of future Buddhahood of the 500 disciples, by Ajñata Kondinya in the 500 Arhats, the parable of the brilliant gem in the top knot, as told in chapter 14, Peaceful Practices, by Shakyamuni Buddha, and finally, the parable of the excellent physician and his children, as told in chapter 16, The Duration of the Life of the Tathagata, by Shakyamuni Buddha. I will now give a brief summary of each of these parables. In the parable of the 3 carts and the burning house, a rich man's decaying and demon-filled manor house catches on fire. His children are playing inside, so to get them to come out of the burning house, the rich man promises them goat carts, deer carts, and ox carts. When they come running out and are free of danger, they are each given a great white ox cart, which is, of course, a better gift than they were promised. The rich father represents the Buddha, while the children are his disciples. 3 kinds of carts represent the 3 vehicles that the Buddha taught as a skillful means, while the great white ox cart represents the one vehicle. In the parable of the wealthy man and his poor son, a boy runs away from his father and doesn't return to his homeland for 50 years. By that time, the father has become very wealthy. He recognizes the poor son, but the son doesn't recognize his father. The father sends a messenger to bring the son to him, but the son is afraid that he is going to be accused of a crime and killed. The father has the messenger release the son and then sends 2 more messengers, who are dressed poorly, to hire the son to clear away dirt with them. The son agrees and goes to work with them. The father then dresses himself in rags and visits the son. He gradually promotes him and calls him son. He promotes him further, putting him in charge of his storehouses and wealth. Finally, the father on his deathbed, and seeing that the son has become more at ease, peaceful, and dignified, reveals that his treasurer is in fact really his son. In the same way, the Buddha uses skillful means to gradually raise the aspirations of his disciples until he can reveal that they are the Buddha's sons who have the treasure store that is the insight of the Buddhas. In the parable of the 3 kinds of medicinal herbs and 2 kinds of trees, the Buddha compares himself to a large rain cloud and the Dharma to the rain. All those who hear the Dharma can practice it according to their capacities, just as the various plants receive the water of a single taste and grow according to their species. The humans and gods are like small herbs. Voice hearers and privately awakened ones are compared to the middle-sized herbs, and bodhisattvas at various stages of development are compared to the large medicinal herbs and to short and tall trees. In the parable of the magic city and the treasure land, a guide leads a group of people in search of a place of treasures. When people start to become discouraged, the leader uses skillful means to create a magic city where they can find peace. The leader makes the city disappear once they are rested and tells them that the city was only a magical creation, made so that they could rest, but the place of treasures is near. In the same way, the Buddha teaches the nirvana of the two vehicles to his disciples to give them a rest halfway, but really intends to lead them by the one vehicle to the wisdom of the Buddha. In the parable of the jewel in the robe, two friends are drinking together when one has to go away on business. Before he leaves, the wealthy friend fastens a priceless gem inside the robe of his poor friend who had fallen asleep. Later, the wealthy man comes across his friend who is still living in poverty. He points out to the poor man that in all that time there had been a priceless gem inside his robe, and that he did not have to be living in poverty. In the same way, the voice hearers had forgotten that in the past, when he was a bodhisattva teaching the Lotus Sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha had already planted the good roots of Buddhahood in them. So they had been settling for the nirvana that was taught as a skillful means. In receiving the assurance of future Buddhahood from Shakyamuni Buddha, they realized that they had long ago aroused the awakening mind. In the parable of the brilliant gem in the top knot, a wheel-turning king rewards his soldiers for distinguishing themselves in war with various gifts. But finally, to the bravest of them, he gives the brilliant gem out of his own top knot. In the same way, the Buddha, as the king of the Dharma, had previously given various teachings using skillful means to his disciples, but now that they are able to understand, he finally gives them the Lotus Sutra. The seventh parable, the parable of the excellent physician and his children, is from the original gate and has to do with the attainment of Buddhahood in the remotest past and not with the one vehicle. Nevertheless, let us summarize it along with the first 6 parables. In this parable, the sons of a physician accidentally poison themselves while he is away on business. When he returns, they beg him to cure them and save their lives. The physician prepares a medicine for them, but some of them won't take it because they have lost their minds and do not like the color, smell, or taste of the medicine. The physician uses the skillful means of leaving for a remote country and sending a messenger back to tell his sons that he has passed away. Hearing this, the sons who would refuse the medicine are filled with sorrow. They recover their right minds and realize that they can no longer rely on their father for help, so they have no choice but to take the medicine. In this way, they are cured, and the father is able to return home to them. In the same way, the Buddha says that he will enter final nirvana through his, though this is only a skillful means. Finally, the third cycle of expounding the one vehicle is when the Buddha does so in terms of past causes and conditions, in other words, past life events. At the end of chapter 6, the Buddha says, "Now I will tell you about my previous existence and also about yours. All of you, listen attentively." In chapter 7, the parable of a magic city, Shakyamuni Buddha begins the third of the 3 cycles of expounding the Dharma by revealing his relationship to his disciples since the remotest past, 3,000 dust particle kalpas ago, when he was the 16th and youngest of the 16 princes who were the sons of the great universal wisdom Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha explains that he and his 15 brothers each taught the Lotus Sutra, declaring that those who received the seed of Buddhahood, in other words, the Lotus Sutra, in such a remote past, are bound to attain Buddhahood. The Buddha says, "Those living beings who followed me heard the Dharma from me in order to attain Anattara Samyak Sambodhi, which is to say, perfect, unsurpassed, and complete enlightenment. Some of them are still in Shravakahood. I now teach them the way to Anattara Samyak Sambodhi. They will be able to attain or to enter the way to Buddhahood by my teaching, but not immediately, because the wisdom of the Tathagata is difficult to believe and difficult to understand." The Buddha followed this story of this past life teaching of the Lotus Sutra with the parable of the magic city in the treasure land, which we had just summarized. Based on this story and the Buddha's statement, Nichiren Shonin insisted that all sentient beings in the Saha world have already received the seed of Buddhahood through the Lotus Sutra from Shakyamuni Buddha 3,000 dust particle kalpas in the past, but have forgotten. And all those who continue to disbelieve the Lotus Sutra commit the transgression of contradicting Shakyamuni Buddha, to whom they are deeply indebted. Throughout the main discourse of the Trace Gate, Shakyamuni Buddha gives assurances of future Buddhahood to his 10 principal disciples and others. For instance, Shariputra is given the prediction of his Buddhahood in chapter 2 and given the name Flower Light, and he will reside in the Pure Land of free from taint. Mahakashyapa is given his assurance in chapter 6, where he will become the Buddha Light in the Pure Land Light virtue. Subhuti is given his assurance also in chapter 6, and he will become the Buddha Beautiful Form in the Pure Land Treasure Born. Mahakatyayana is also given his prediction in chapter 6, and he will become the Buddha Jambunada Gold Light. No Pure Land is given, though it is presumed that he will have one. Modgalyana is given his prediction also in chapter 6, and he will become Tamala Patra Chandana, fragrance, in the Pure Land mind happiness. Purna will be given his assurance in chapter 8, and he will become the Buddha Dharma brightness in the Pure Land good purity. And 500 arhats are also given their assurances in chapter 8, and they will each become the Buddha universal brightness, or a Buddha named universal brightness. Ananda is given his prediction or assurance in chapter 9, and he will become the Buddha mountain sea wisdom supernatural power king in the Pure Land always raising banner of victory. Rahula is also given a prediction in chapter 9, and he will become the Buddha walking on flowers of 7 treasures. 2,000 Shravakas, or voice hearers, are also given predictions in chapter 9, and they will each become a Buddha named treasure form. Mahaprajapati is given her prediction in chapter 13, and she will become the Buddha gladly seen by all beings. And Yashodhara is also given a prediction in chapter 13, and will become the Buddha emitting 10 million rays of light. All of the 10 principal disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha, as well as his aunt and wife, who had both become nuns, or bhikshunis, received predictions of Buddhahood, with the curious exception of Upali. No explanation is given for his omission. The 500 arhats may be a reference to the 500 arhats present at the first Buddhist council after the passing of the Buddha. So all of them will also go on to practice the Bodhisattva way and become Buddhas. Herein is the major teaching of the one vehicle found in the trace gate, that all those who hear the Buddha's teachings and put them into practice will ultimately attain Buddhahood. With that, I bring the second part of this 4-part presentation of the teachings of the Lotus Sutra to a close. I hope that this presentation was helpful and informative and will help to enrich your faith in and practice of Nichiren Buddhism.